Mala fl-studio l-ambasċatriċa Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, ningrazzjakom tal-qeddim reporter, ovvjament se nitkellmu bl-Ingliż. Thank you for coming to Reporter and welcome obviously to you have not been a very long time to Malta, so it's really baptism of fire, right? I'd like to obviously ask you a few questions not only about Malta and the US and US relations, but also about the situation in the Med, which obviously concern us, at least should concern us, but sometimes we're so self-centered that we forget what's happening. Why do you think, I mean, and it's a very sort of rather superficial question, but I mean, I do have to ask, why do you think the US would want to spend so much time and energy? And this is the impression we do have, especially with the embassy complex, the fact that you're quite visible in the press.
Yes.
To Malta, I mean, why is Malta so significant or of importance? Why would you want to give this attention to Malta?
Okay. I must admit I'm surprised to receive the question because I think you must well understand your strategic position in the Mediterranean. The linkage that you provide between Europe and North Africa, the attention and assistance that you have provided to North African nations, particularly Libya, and in the efforts to assist Libyans to have their revolution, to take steps, important steps toward democracy. You have played a very important role, a role that the entire world, and particularly the United States, recognizes. So it seems very straightforward from our perspective that we would want a strong presence here. I know we've had one over the years, but a strong presence here at this time as we look forward to Mediterranean security in particular, whether that is physical security, the search and rescue that Malta carries out in the area, the assistance for democratic and economic reform in North Africa, as well as other issues that are more international than simply regional.
If we had to look at US foreign policy, we wouldn't really notice any amazing, major changes in US foreign policy over the ages. But could you perhaps point out what you would perhaps underline as a major, policy outlook or change in the Obama administration vis-a-vis, the Mediterranean and the Central Mediterranean?
I think you're very right when you talk about there not being major changes over the ages, and it's something that we're often reminding our allies, our partners, friends, and the others about, that U.S. foreign policy does not make drastic changes between and among administrations. We're very slow going, slow moving, slow shifting as things go forward. I believe the Obama administration would posit that, of course, it is the way that we deal internationally that may have changed from the previous administration. We have a much more multilateral focus on resolving issues around the world. Dialogue, respectful communication, as the president laid out in his Cairo speech shortly after his election. So it's the way that we communicate, the way that we come to consensus, the fact that we believe international consensus on international problems is very important, as opposed to a unilateral decision-making. We are much more focused on making sure that we cooperate.
Well, one of the more significant things, before obviously I return to Malta, one of the more significant things in the Libya issue, apart from the fact that Libya is not exactly stable, obviously a few very important steps have been taken towards democracy, but still one has to see if this develops into a stable democratic society. One of the most notable things, however, was at least the apparent decision by the US administration not to intervene directly in Libya. And this was notably different from at least the history of what has happened in conflict areas. Is this something is this something a reflection of the pressure of the media, the American public, that they are telling the administration, the politicians, do not get involved on the ground when there are conflicts? Is this a reality, a result of this pressure, of this sort of perception?
Well, the first thing, of course, is that we are a democracy, so therefore the opinions of the American people certainly have an impact and do count appropriately as far as the decisions that the government takes. That said, I would not say that the decisions were taken as a basis from public pressure or simply public opinion. Every conflict around the world, perforce, has to be taken on an individual basis. It's never going to be the same in country A as it is in country B or country C, D, E, or F for that matter. You have to see what the circumstances are within the country, how you determine, what exactly the dispute is about or over, how far, what are people wanting, and what the world wants to do about it. And therefore, just giving countries as examples, how you deal with Iraq, how you deal with Libya, how you deal with Syria, has to be different because the situations are always very different internally.
But if we look at the Syria question, where we have a veritable bloodbath in Syria, the lack of intervention by France, UK, any other nation, the US, has meant that the opposition has taken a long time to gain any ground. Whereas in Libya, it's at least Libyan people tell you themselves, had it not been for the intervention, the aid from the UK and France especially, they would not have catalyzed change so quickly. Don't you think that in Syria, it's very apparent, now obviously I'm not trying to suggest anything that it's wrong or right, but that the lack of intervention there, because of also the circumstances, Israel being close to this area, a very highly vulnerable area, is leading to a further bloodbath?
Unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you're looking at it, I would say no. Libya had an international consensus of a far greater degree than there has been on Syria. If you look at the countries that are most immediately surrounding Syria, Jordan, Iraq, etc., they are very cautious in their outlook and their statements, and they're the ones that are closest to what's going on, to see the impact on not only the Syrian people, but people coming across the border into their own countries. And that, we believe, is a reflection of the complexities of the situation. I think it's impossible for anyone to argue from that arming or giving even more support than has been given to the opposition would necessarily have cut down on the bloodshed that is occurring now. Certainly from our perspective, the United States, we are looking for United Nations consensus and action. We are, as you know, the larger international community, we believe, is being held back by some UN members who are not yet in agreement. We don't think that position is correct, but we are determined to move forward as best as possible to try and minimize the bloodshed that is being carried out. The opposition as well, you also probably know, has had challenges with being organized and working together. So to arm at earlier stages may have been positive, may have been negative. It's really impossible to say.
Before I come to the Palestinian issue, I mean, we talk about democracy, and then when the democratic process comes into action and certain people are elected, we start to question their whether they are ideal to be the leaders of these countries. I'm not talking about I'm not talking
anything
about
specific, or?
I'm talking about Egypt in particular.
You're talking about Egypt.
Egypt in particular.
Oh, okay.
I mean, democracy obviously has you can't question it. If people want a radical Muslim or a moderate Muslim or a radical rightist or a leftist, it's up to the people to decide.
Okay.
Where would you think the U.S. administration would draw a line when democracy comes into play? I mean, does Egypt worry you, for example, as things stand today?
Does Egypt worry us? Egypt, in a general sense, obviously has a good number of challenges before it. I mean, all of these countries, as they take these important steps for greater democratic participation, trying to focus on economic reform, which supports successful democracy, with levels of unemployment, with certain lack of development, with corruption that's happened in the past, with strained budgets, and with the strain that is already on the entire international community. It reminds me of the musical Jesus Christ Superstar. One of the lines in the opening is, why did you choose this time to do it? It was a bad time to choose. I mean, if these revolutions had occurred 5 years ago when we were all in better economic situation where we could perhaps give more economic support, it might have been better. And I'm saying that because our own budgets are very challenged with how much attention and money we can give to support.
What about the fact that I'm talking about the choice of the person, the choice of the, does that worry the US?
Absolutely. No, there are lots of things to worry about.
Do you feel does the US administration feel uncomfortable with people who are
democratically elected?
Not democratically elected. No, they represent quite a radical part of Egyptian society.
We are hoping that whomever people choose to run their nations allow them to express themselves democratically, that they allow for political participation, that there is a respect for human rights, the role of active participation of women in public life, freedom of speech, association, etc., etc. Any leader that is going to put pressure on those sorts of basic rights, from our perspective, are one that we're going to have trouble with and obviously have dialogue with privately as well as publicly. We are willing to work with any democratically elected government that respects those basic rights, and I think we've proven that time and again.
The Palestinian issue, if one reads the Arab press for a very long time, obviously the key answer, they say, to all the problems in Palestine is American foreign policy.
Oh, would that were so.
This is the perception. The perception. It's not entirely unjustified. But let's not go. Do you think that the Palestinian question really depends on the U.S., or is it a question or is it rather the benevolence of the Israeli administration?
Okay, well, you can answer that question for yourself. Obviously, I don't think it depends on the U.S., because if it depended on the U.S., it would have been resolved long ago. Our commitment, interest, desire for a just, lasting, comprehensive peace between those two peoples is long-standing and absolutely heartfelt, without a doubt. That said, it clearly is between the two people, and I can't remember which president, having been dealing with this issue for about 25 years now personally, we cannot want it more than the parties themselves. Those very difficult steps that are necessary to take to ensure that there's peace between the people have to be taken by Israelis and Palestinians. It's not up to the United States or the European Union or the Quartet or anybody else. We can help, we can guide, we can support, but they must take those difficult steps forward.
Would you blame one party more than the other, or do you think that both are to blame for the impasse? Can you blame the Palestinians in the same way one blames the Israelis?
You're using the word blame. I'm saying that they both have difficult choices and steps to take.
That's why I guess I call myself a journalist and you're a diplomat. But, let's come back to Malta.
Okay.
I mean, when you look at the Maltese situation, I obviously would like to ask you something which obviously might concern you. I probably would imagine has concerned you. The issue of the migration issue, the issue of xenophobia, the issue that it has been proven that Maltese have this issue that politicians are rather wary to change the detention policy, to declare they're going to change the detention policy. Does this concern you? I didn't say worry, you concern you.
And I heard concern. Yes, as you know, we have a very strong and important partnership with Malta with regard to refugees. It is our honor to continue that partnership, and as you know, the United States does take refugees and has taken over 1,000 in the last several years. We will continue that partnership because we do recognize that Malta, has a finite amount of space, has a large population for that space, and that the entire international community has a responsibility to deal with this international problem. Refugees, migrants are not a Maltese issue. It is an international issue. How Malta deals with these migrants and refugees while they are in Malta obviously is an issue that the international community looks at. I know there have been a number of reports, whether from international organizations, and of course the press is looking at this as well. I had the opportunity to visit an open center just last week.
Were you shocked by what you saw at the open center?
Was I shocked by what I saw? I was not.
I can't use the word concerned again.
No, shocked is fine. And I would say, my personal view, I was not shocked, but you're also talking to someone who visited Palestinian refugee camps on a daily basis for 3 years. So, and Malta is crowded, but the refugee camps in the Gaza Strip are the most highly populated areas in the entire world.
Before we'll have a short break here for commercials. A diplomat, always a diplomat. We'll be back on reporting.
Okay.
Għix il-ġurnata memorabbli tat-tiġ tiegħek billi tħalli dak kollu li hu tekniku f'idejna. Nistgħu nipprovdulek sistemi ta' dwal u sound, preżentaturi, artisti u kantanti, filming b'sistemi HD, magħmar dekorati b'temi speċjali, dekorazzjonijiet u skulturi bis-silġ, disinjar u stampar ta' inviti u sistemi elettroniċi ta' interpretazzjoni għal mistiedna barranin tiegħek. Ikkonsulta fuq 2-1-4-8-6-3-0 u dak li jidher impossibbli ngħinuk tagħmlu possibbli.
Xemx u xita, Alla jaf meta, it-temp jinbidel f'ħakkatajn, għalhekk trid taf f'idejn l-esperti. Tinet, twapet, gazebos, sufanijiet u amara għal barra, dwar u effetti speċjali u maftit mela ħafna affarijiet Casapinta Exhibitions and Events jistgħu joffrulek. Għalhekk jekk għandek xi attivitajiet fuq barra, eżibizzjonijiet jew xi tiġ, ċemplilna issa ħal-stima.
Lob tan-nar u effetti pirotekniċi li jistgħu jintużaw faċilment u mingħajr periklu waqt attivitajiet diversi kemm fl-apert jew fil-magħluq. ċemplu Studio 7 fuq 2-1-4-8-6-3-0-1.
State of the art and professional. LED screens, sound, stage, lights. Call Studio 7 on 21-486-301.
Lob tan-nar u effetti pirotekniċi li jistgħu jintużaw faċilment u mingħajr periklu waqt attivitajiet diversi kemm fl-apert jew fil-magħluq. ċemplu Studio 7 fuq 2-1-4-8-6-3-0-1.
Studio 7 can handle all your technical needs and make your wedding that extra special. We can provide and deliver portable simultaneous interpretation, video projections, lighting and sound equipment, DJ and entertainment services, high-definition filming services, themed rooms and chill-out areas, ice sculptures and decorations, customized design and printing. Call Studio 7 on 21-486-301.
Back to reporter. With us, we have with us the American ambassador. Thank you for being with us. We were talking about the open centers, the detention policy, and I had to stop you because of a commercial break. You were saying.
Well, the one thing I did want to add is, in addition to continuing to take refugees from Malta, one of the things we also want to give greater attention to is assisting with integration, because that is a challenge. As you talk about people xenophobic or otherwise in Malta, and that's not something I can yet judge. I haven't been here long enough, and no one's been mean to me. We want to help with integration, and we have communities in the United States and in New England, the northern part, that are largely European Americans, and they have had successful absorption of refugees who are very different from them. And I think that example might be useful for Malta, because it's the same sort of thing. We're a small society that is very homogeneous, that is accepting people that.
But do you think that perhaps the political class and the public in general are exaggerating the so-called or perceived threat of migrants? That we tend to exaggerate. We tend to exaggerate the threat to society.
Well, I think the key word is perceived, which makes it a very individual perspective. Being an American, where we absolutely recognize that the strength of our nation is because of its diversity. As a brown female person, you know, I'm often going into places where I am a minority, whether it's, you know, in my professional life or personal life, and I know what I bring, and I think I improve discussion, points of view, adding additional things to it. So because we prize that in the United States, it would be hard for me to fully understand anyone saying that they are afraid of people who are different coming into the society. And I'll leave it there.
Malta's political situation is obviously quite colorful, like any other place, and you're at the right moment at the wrong time, probably. But what is your sort of your? I'm not asking you to make any political statement here, but do you think that we are? Do you find anything, you know, eccentric in the way we do things, or do you think that we are too emotional, we are too impulsive, too Latin compared to what you had expected, perhaps?
I think I had a good briefing before I arrived, so I haven't come across anything unexpected. I will say it has been fascinating to observe the local political scene, and because of your strategic position, the passions are interesting for me to observe, because there's so much else also going around in the world. I can't gainsay any of it, because the elections in the United States are passionate and personal. And so that we have a very similar outlook on the elections.
The last minute and a half, I'd just like to focus on whether you know, there is this sort of again, I have to use the word perception, that the US tends to try and improve its relations, not in terms of good relations or economic relations, with different members of the EU. To benefit obviously its foreign policy. I'll mention the case of Poland, the case of other states, and then there are other states obviously which tend to say, look, this is not for us. Do you expect Malta to fall in line in a different way from other EU states, or are you just treating Malta as any other EU state?
We give Malta absolutely its full due as a sovereign nation, part of the EU. It is very important for us to have a strong bilateral relationship. I don't think any nation would describe itself as falling in line, and certainly I wouldn't, and the United States government wouldn't. It's a bilateral relationship, partners, sovereign exchanges of information, views, and policies. That's the way it works.
If you had to put down a priority list, very quick priority list of what you would love to achieve when as an ambassador here, what would your priority list be? At least the first three, apart from.
My first three are continuing to work with Malta on human rights issues, whether it's trafficking in persons, other human rights issues, women's participation in public life, gay rights, etc. Increasing U.S. investment, U.S. business here in Malta, and also vice versa. And I'd say Mediterranean security. We've been working with Malta on search and rescue issues to excellent effect over the years, and I think this is something we can continue to do.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for coming to Reporter. I would have loved to ask you a few more questions, but I think
next time, I hope.
I think that we'll let things settle down a little bit, and
Okay.
then we'll go for it.
My pleasure.
Thank you for coming to Reporter.
Thank you.